Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So in today's video, the topic which we will be covering is how can we use parameter and triggers in a Jenkins pipeline job. Without getting any delay, let's get started. So in pipeline job, as we have to write everything in form of code, we have to write the Jenkins file and we have proper syntax to write triggers and to define parameter in a pipeline job. So I have already written this blog post for you guys. I will be giving the URL in the description. You can check it out. And if you want to know how exactly each parameter and each trigger work, there is a video I have already created for in detailed description about parameters. Here I have a video already created for in detail like how triggers work. In this video we will be covering the same topic, but we will be writing it in a Jenkins file, or you can say in form of code. So let's start with parameters. So parameters basically can drive the entire flow of a pipeline. In my previous video I have explained how can you write a simple pipeline job. That will be hovering somewhere here or here in the I button. You can check that out if you do not know how to write a Jenkins pipeline. Let's create our pipeline job with parameters in it. So here is the sample pipeline I have already written here. To add a parameter, we have introduced a new block in the pipeline, parameters, and inside this parameter we have different options like this one, Boolean param, then we have the choice, then we have the string, then we have the file. So these are the methods via which we can define different parameters. Similarly, each of them has a default value, like bool has this one. To define a default value to a choice variable, we have to use choices colon, then we have to define a list of the same. And similarly for string, we have a default value inside single quotes, and for file we can write the default value, but we need to know the exact location of the file. Similarly, we are defining the description of each of the parameter. We have the name of the parameter, test bool. Similarly, this parameter has name test choice param, and so on. Then for the overview purpose, in this pipeline we are like creating a pipeline, running it on any Jenkins agent available. Then we are defining stages, and this has only single stage hello, and in this stage we have a single step block, and in this block we are executing the echo module of Jenkins, which is printing the test bool parameter value and test choice parameter value, which are defined here. So here's the test bool and here's the test choice param. Then here in this line we are using the sh module of Jenkins to execute the shell command, and this is how you can use shell command to print these variables, variable values. So we are printing test str parameter, which is defined right here. Similarly, the test file parameter, which is defined right here. We have to use the dollar, of course we are using the shell here. Then we have the post action, and we have always written in post action that this block will execute no matter the job fail, pass, or do whatever. Let's copy the same and add it in the pipeline. So this is our Jenkins cluster ready. Let's create a new pipeline job and let's name it as test parameter pipeline, and okay, let me directly paste the script I just copied, and here you can see everything is like highlighted. So apply the changes, there is no error. Now let's go back to the job. So as I hit the build now button, you will see the job is started and the job failed. So this is an expected failure. I will tell you why. Finally, it's time to move towards the next section of the blog post. So this is kind of a bug which exists in Jenkins from a long time. These are the tracker for the issues if you want to follow. That executing the first build basically is not setting up the parameters for us, and this is kind of a Jira where they have provided the fix. It's kind of a similar error which we are facing if we go to the console of the job. Property not defined, something like that. Yeah, no such property. Now people will say that okay, now we have this error, then why should I be using Jenkins pipeline? Because things work in freestyle jobs. So how Jenkins pipeline flow work? Let's try that. So what happens here is that as soon as I paste my pipeline script here and then I hit the run button, or you can say the build button, what happens is Jenkins actually check that did the user has defined any values, or you can say Jenkins will check that are there any property which is already set by user. In our case, which wasn't, because the job was just created and we have just pasted the file here. Earlier these fields were not there when we created the job. So what Jenkins will do is, as there were no properties defined by the user, so it didn't set up anything and it directly start executing the pipeline. Then the Jenkins sees that, okay, in this pipeline they are setting the parameters. So during the first execution, Jenkins set up all these parameters, and then it moved towards the next step, and it says that, okay, now you are trying to use a parameter named as test_bool, which doesn't exist because the properties were not defined in the first execution of the job. To overcome this issue, we have another method as well to define parameters in a Jenkins job, which is again right here in the Jenkins blog post. So we have to add the properties block in this scenario because this is the second method of defining the parameter. See here, we are not starting the Jenkins file with the pipeline block. We are using the properties block first, then we are defining the parameters in this properties block, and then we are using this groovy code. So what this code basically is doing is that it will iterate on each of these parameters. So params.each is kind of a loop in Groovy. It will pick up every key and value from these parameters. So let's say default value is the v here and key is the test bool. So Jenkins execute in a way that it set a variable named as env, and inside that it creates all these multiple keys during the execution if the properties were set. But in the first execution this wasn't the case, so we are setting it manually. So we are looping over all these parameters, we are taking all the keys and values, and we are setting up the values for the keys. So in simple word, you can say that this basically is exporting all these variables before starting the pipeline block. So once it will export all these values, now Jenkins will be knowing that, okay, the test bool is already exported and it will not fail. So let's try this one. Let me create a new pipeline for this. Let's name it as test param pipeline method 2 or 02. Let me paste the second code which I have written with the property block, parameter block, and params.each groovy code. Let me save the changes. Let me build it now. And here, if I refresh the pipeline, you will see that job is failing. This is also expected because Jenkins has very strict policy if we are using the groovy code directly inside the pipeline. So we have to go to the script approval page and we have to approve this string object that we will be using the string object. So basically we have to like say Jenkins that we will be using some custom groovy code in our pipeline, and you can like just don't show these errors. So to approve these scripts, you have to go to the dashboard, you have to look for manage Jenkins, then you have to look for in process script approvals, and here you will see that it is asking us to use these direct objects. Just approve it. Now let me delete this job and let me recreate it because otherwise it won't be the first execution. Pasting the same code, saving the project, and again hitting the build now button. If I refresh the page, you see it's the first build of this job and it is passing and it is displaying all the values correctly. The true is the Boolean value, then choice 1 is the choice value, and the test string. These were the two tricks here. If you are using this method, then you should be aware that the first execution of the job will fail, and if you are using this method, then you have to make sure that this will be requiring the script approval in the Jenkins. That's pretty much about using parameters in Jenkins, and these are the two methods to define parameters. I would recommend using the second one because this is much stable, of course. Now let's move towards the second part of this video, which is defining triggers in Jenkins pipeline job. Here is the next section of the blog post, defining the triggers in Jenkins job, and this is a sample pipeline for the same. These are the basic triggers which I have defined. You can say I have defined the upstream trigger that whenever the job 1 gets completed, trigger this pipeline. This has, again, upstream trigger can have multiple features that if the job is stable, if the job is failed, then only trigger the next job. So these are the option to use the same. If you will use just upstream and then give the job name, then it will trigger only if the upstream job gets success. Similarly for failure and stable. If you want to execute the current pipeline, no matter what is the status of the upstream job, you can directly write abort as the threshold and then define the job names here. Similarly, if you want to trigger the pipeline periodically, you can use the cron module of Jenkins. You can use the brackets, and inside the single quotes you can define the same cron job mechanism. Similarly for the pollSCM, it's pretty much similar to cron job, but if you are using the pollSCM, then in one of the stages you have to define the git repository, something like this. Inside steps you have to use git and then the repository URL. So whenever any change happens in this repository, the Jenkins will trigger this job based on the pollSCM trigger mechanism. Let's try this method directly. Copy the code base and create a new pipeline, test trigger job, and of course pipeline job. Okay, let me directly paste the code here. But if we are defining parameters in the properties block and defining triggers in the pipeline block, it will be completely fine. Although just for the sake of symmetry, we can define the same in properties block as well. It's completely dependent on you how you want to use it. I want to use it like this, so I'm using this method. So here we have two stages. The first stage will clone the repository and the second stage will display the echo. So let me save the changes and build the job once. As you see, it is doing the first stage, which is setting up the repository, and soon it will be doing the second stage, which is displaying hello. You can definitely check out the console of the same. It is doing the same stuff. Now if we go back to the configuration of this job, you will see it has defined these triggers for me, and it has set all the 3 triggers because I have defined all of them. So the first one is of course the upstream trigger. Whenever if I execute the job 1, it should execute the entire pipeline. Periodically, of course, it will trigger based on every single minute. Then pollSCM, if anything change in this repository, trigger this job. So let us test every single one of them. Let's go back to this job and see the second execution is automatically started, and it has started by the timer. So again, first is verified that cron job trigger or periodically trigger is working. Now let's execute the job 1 to make sure that it is working fine. You see I have the 5 execution here. As I hit the build now, there is the 6th execution, and if I go back to the test trigger job, you can see here's the 3rd build which is pending, and it is started by the upstream project job 1. So upstream triggering is of course working in the same. Now of course the 4th one, I guess it started by the timer. So let me disable that because it will keep on triggering the job. We have verified this one, we have verified this one. Let's save the changes. So now the only one remaining is the git repository one. So now let me change in this repository to make sure that trigger is working fine. As we have done the changes, so now we just have to wait for the 5th trigger of this pipeline because we have done the changes in the git repository. You can see the 5th execution is started, and if I click on the same, it is triggered by the pollSCM. It is written right here, started by the SCM changes, and you can click on this URL to make sure that what exactly has changed. So I just added a new line in my code base, and same in the console log, you can see it is cloning the repository and displaying the hello world and executing the post step. Now one last thing which is remaining for this triggering is that if you do not want to define an extra stage here, or if you are using pipeline script from SCM, then whatever the repository you are defining here will act as a repository that will be fetched by the pollSCM Jenkins module to validate the changes. What I mean by that is that if anything happens in this repository, if any change merge in this repository on the specified branch, which is master in current case, Jenkins will trigger the job for that. We do not have to define an extra stage for that. So let us try that as well. I have already written this job right here, the trigger pipeline. You can see this pipeline doesn't have any stage that is defining the repository. Let me change the pipeline configuration to use the GitHub repository. Then of course the branch name is master, and this is the Jenkins file name. Again, all these URLs will be available in the description. So as I hit the build now button, you will see the 8th execution has started, and it is doing the declarative checkout. Now before it executes the next build based on the timer, let me disable them as of now. So see, I have not removed the pollSCM, and you can see pipeline is getting fetched from this repository. So let me save the changes so that it won't trigger the 9th build based on the timer. Now let me change something in this repository. Let's add something in the readme. Commit the changes. Let's wait for the Jenkins to fetch the changes. You can see the 9th build has already started, and if I click on the same, and you can see that the job is started by the SCM changes. Similarly, it will cloning the repository as the first stage, which is declarative checkout, post added by default, and here is the stage which we have defined, the hello stage, and the output of the same. Similarly, we have the parameterized pipeline step also added here. So we can directly define this job as well using the pipeline script from SCM instead of copy pasting the file. If you have any questions or if you are struggling with any configuration, feel free to put comment in the comment box. Yep, I mean, this is how you can define parameters in your Jenkins pipeline job, and this is how you can set different type of triggers in form of code in your Jenkins pipeline. So if you like the video, feel free to share it with your colleagues, those who are trying to learn Jenkins. Do subscribe to my channel and like the video, and thanks for watching.